First of all, I would like to invoke your recollections of what was being declared by the regime in TPLF in Tigray Regional Administration on the eve of the conflict and after the eve, just right next day. In the eve of the conflict, our leaders had a conversation with regional leaders. The regional leader has just called the Prime Minister that they can handle issues amicably. The discord that they have could have been solved and sorted out in a civil manner. And the Prime Minister just promised him that they can issue, but that they wished in a very cordial way. And upon that discussion, then he had to send the new money, the new bill, so that the Tigray region could be furnished with adequate resources to run the daily business of the region. And what happened was, the very same day in the evening, the Northern Command was attacked in several posts in several areas. As we just tried to say last time, in Mekelle area, we did not have combatant military personnel. We had only staffers, health workers, and administrative staffs. Though we did not have soldiers here. In other posts, we have soldiers in various posts, but the attack was actually occurred in tandem, simultaneously in several posts. In Mekelle, it was easier because we did not have many soldiers. In other areas, they tried to extricate themselves, first repelling the attack, and then protect themselves, and then they managed to escape and retreat in some areas to Eritrean border, in the other areas to the safer hideouts. In some posts, like in Daglash, you might have heard, it took them 3 days for the Brigadier General to save his forces, which was being attacked for 3 consecutive days until the other forces arrived and then rescued them. In Mekelle, they managed to easily subdue the whole compound because we did not have enough arms and personnel there. And then the next day, what you heard was the declaration by the Tigrayan leaders that now they equipped themselves, they armed themselves with the weaponry which can attack anybody if whoever comes and dares to face with them. They were ready to fight and combat to the very end. On the other account, again, I want to invoke your recollection, is they just said when the government of Ethiopia declared the seize of rockets and missiles which could go up to 300 kilometers, they went out and said not only 300, but we are capable of striking Addis and Debre. Well, our aircrafts could land and fly. They can strike real time. So that was their account, which means that means they attacked the command force. Then again they took the arms, they equipped themselves, and then they were too adamant and confident they can attack the federal government and then also the capital. So this is the account of who began the conflict in the first place, because they didn't hide, they didn't mince their words. They were even brazenly bragging about the seizure of the armaments that they had. So then the government forced it to take actions, and then it waged the campaign based on the 3 very clear objectives. And so that takes us to the objective of the campaign and the operation that's going on now. As it was stated by the Prime Minister last time, now this campaign was very much unwarranted, very much unprovoked, and it's very much heinous and downright treasonous. So by all means, it has to be redressed. If Ethiopia has to sustain, like any other country, rule of law has to be prevailed, the constitution has to be upheld, and then we have to make sure that no one, not any entity, a group or individual, whether armed or not armed, could be allowed to run amok and become the law unto itself. So a country has to be run by the rule of law. So any region, any group, any district has to abide by the constitution, and the federal government has a moral, legal, and constitutional right and obligation to make sure that happens. So the very objectives of this operation then are none but three, and very much clear. One is because of it is imminent danger. The artillery, the arsenal that the Tigray region and the TPLF gang admitted to have a seizure of either has to be wrested, has to be taken away, or destroyed, lest it would strike its own people, Ethiopians in various parts of the region, and also neighboring countries, so that it can draw the neighboring countries into the conflict, and then to ascribe the issue as if the federal government has called in an alien element so that they will be attacked. That could again would be tantamount to treasonous, because you cannot collude with an alien element to attack your own people. That cannot be done, but that's what they want the issue to appear. So it has to be destroyed, or it has to be wrested from the seizure, because they admitted they have a rocket and a missile that can go up to 700 kilometers. That means from Mekelle to Addis or Bishoftu is almost equal to 600 to 700 kilometers. So if they have it upon their own account, then it has to be destroyed, because no region, no district is allowed to be armed with such a devastating arsenal. That's only the responsibility of the federal government. The second objective of the operation is to make sure the constitution is upheld and rule of law prevailed in Ethiopia. And that's also the obligation and duty of federal government. And in such a way also to make sure that the ringleaders have to be brought under the law and have to be judged by the book. It's only then that we have a country of all. It's only then that we can have a country whereby everyone can breathe an air of democracy in the open political space. If we allow an entity to be armed and to threat the federal government to compel to sit down and talk just because an entity is armed, and then it will be the land of the law of the bush. It will not be the land of the law. So these guys, they wish to invoke the Orwellian theory. They don't wish and they don't believe, and they are not willing to be one among us. If they rule, then we'll be together. If others would rule in their turn, upon even democracy, upon even people's choice, then they are not the ones to come to the terms and to come to the fold. Unless they call the shots, then they are not with us. That is the option of the ringleaders there. But this operation will be short. Its objectives are very much clear. And the government will make sure that unintended consequences will be less, and then civilians will be protected in as much due care as possible. And only sports targets whereby arms that belong to the federal government would either be reconquered and captured or destroyed, so that these elements would not use them against the people of Ethiopia in various corners. This is how the conflict was begun, and then what the government is doing. But it's also good to remind you the genesis. What happens in the last 2.5 years? EPRDF, many of us were the members. We're proud that the country was trying to usher an era of democracy, but again we somehow lost the way and we derailed. And also then the law of very control freak nature was evolving within the party, within the government, and the environment that we all were appreciating and we all were hoping for and we were trying to also expand did not broaden in a way that we were trying. So some elements among the party, within the party, then they have to seize all the controls, and a suffocation was the norm, the fact of the day. Then people try to change the norm and to bring about democracy, and some reformist elements within the party all tried their best, and that collaborated and complemented with the struggles within the people outside the party that augmented each other. And then the last 2 and 3 years, a new dawn actually brought to Ethiopia so that everybody could cherish a democratic life. And then the Prime Minister took very much strong initiative. He invited all dissidents who were languishing abroad for 30, 40 years, just because of the hardline position these TPLF ringleaders, all gurus had. They were opposing when these dissidents were allowed to come to Ethiopia. They said, if they come, this country would be the land of terrorists. Now, 2.5 years later, just to remind you what happened, there had been a number of elders, religious leaders, dignitaries, who've been trying to assuage and convince and coddle and prod the TPLF leaders to come to terms and discuss so that the difference could be solved amicably. What happened was they ridiculed some and rebuffed all. All attempts to convince them to come to a civil dialogue in a cordial manner, none but beaten dust. And now, when they were being entreated to come to dialogue, what they said was they would not sit down and discuss with the government unless the former terrorist institutions or organizations which they forced them to stay outside the country for decades flanked them. Unless ONLF, Onekshani, which is now killing Ethiopians in the western part of Ethiopia, would sit with them. Unless OBNEG, which is in the Somali region, in the Ogaden region, would flank with the other side. They said they wouldn't sit and discuss with the government. So it's not because the government didn't want to discuss and solve the issue amicably, but they refused adamantly for the umpteenth times, not once, not twice, but time and again. And now the other issue, their older guards were also bringing the issue of forming a party, uniting the party with all the front and then also sister parties in all regions. They said there would be a time, and then it was also possible to change the program of the party. Now, when the reformist government came and then called for the party to be united, they said they wouldn't go for it. The very reason, the very points, the very arguments that we were pushing for, now they stood against. And then the party had to be united in their absence, and then they tried to drag all reform agendas. In the economic forum, there were some studies which were being done, even before Prime Minister Abiy has come. And in some of the committees, they were members. In some of the committees, they were chairs. And many of recommendations they were in. Now, when Abiy tried to implement some of the reforms, domesticating it as a homegrown economy, they went out and attacked it, as if Abiy derailed from the democratic and developmental path. So all economic reform agendas, they tried to derail, they couldn't succeed. When prisoners were decided to be released, they vehemently opposed Some of the prisoners who were released were those who were waiting in the death row, because they were the ones which were actually put by now, guys who are purporting to struggle for democracy, hiding in Mekelle in some hotels. They opposed releasing prisoners. Now prisoners were released. When a number of laws regarding the civic society law and anti-terrorism law was actually decided to be improved for a little bit to broaden political space, they were against it. Now when they failed to do this, then they wanted to go their own way. On one of the last ditch, when the federal government, the parliament, and the party decided to postpone the election because of COVID, they didn't want to go with it. They wanted to violate the constitution. As you might remember, this constitution was drafted where they were in the helm of the power. They had the lion's share. And then after they retreated to Mekelle, they were the ones who were accusing the reformist government of not respecting this constitution. And then they were the ones who turned against this constitution and then went on their own way to hold election, an illegal commission of election, an illegal assembly. That was the first, not the first one of the violations of the constitution. Now the last step, which is a red line, which is very much irredeemable, is attacking Ethiopian National Defense Forces. That is the symbol and the last ditch of a sovereignty of any country. You cannot just sit with any entity who attacks your headquarters, who attacks your command, and who threatens to dismantle your capital, and then go and sit and discuss not to strike you. So the first thing any country does is to demolish, to destroy that threat, and then to sit down and talk, so that lasting peace would come and prevail. So that's what this government is doing. And that's why we are saying its objectives are limited and very clear. And it is salvaging the nation, salvaging the sovereignty of the country, and then making sure that this country holds together. And then we'll sit and talk with whoever has a discord with the government. These are some of the points I just want to highlight, but I can also entertain if you have some questions so that we can brief them adequately.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. My name is Groom Chala, CGTN. My interest is on the humanitarian side of the ongoing conflicts at the moment, including the United Nations. Other humanitarian organizations have fears of millions being evicted because of the conflict. And they also complain of no access to provide perhaps the basic necessities of those who could be evicted because of the ongoing war. What is really the update on that, and what is the government doing to protect civilians from being affected as per the promise made at the beginning? Perhaps number two, I just also want to understand, where is the war now? Where is the conflict now? There are many calls that are being made to bring the two sides, the central government and the Tigray regional state, under a roundtable discussion. The African Union is making attempts, we heard. The UN is also calling for that. Is there any window of opportunity for a dialogue at this point in time? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. My name is Brook Abdu. I'm from the Reporter newspaper. My first question is, what is the level of casualties that the two sides faced, be it from on the first day of the attack or after that? And the other one is, you've mentioned about when you intend to sit for negotiations, but when could that happen? And is there any possibility of negotiations happening? And the other point is, when do you plan to conclude this campaign, except for mentioning that it will be very short? When exactly do you plan to conclude it? Thank you very much.
My question is, there are fears that the conflict could spiral into a region-wide conflict, or at least have regional consequences. I'm thinking of Eritrea, maybe even Sudan. What do you say to these concerns being expressed by analysts, diplomats, and others that this conflict could spiral into a region-wide conflict?
Hi, Ambassador Simon Marks with the New York Times. Well, quick follow-up, obviously, just to reiterate Brooke's question on casualties and injuries. There have been reports of hundreds on both sides from various military sources. It would be good to hear that from the horse's mouth. Exact numbers of casualties and if any civilians have been impacted by what's happening. And just, can you give us an overview of what the government is in control of militarily? Because there's been reports that Dansha is obviously in federal hands, and I think state media reported that Himura was also under control. Is that true? And is there something you can say about the east? Because we've heard a large buildup of troops in the Afar region around Raya. Is there fighting there? And has violence gone over the border towards Alimata? There were some rumors around that. If you could confirm that, that would be great. And one is just a clarification. You mentioned, is it 100% that the TPLF possess missiles capable of reaching Addis? I just wanted to, because I know you're mentioning it, I just wanted to confirm that. Thank you.
Thank you, Honor. My name is Coletta Wanjohi from FSN News Agency. I'd like to ask Honorable on the issue, because we know the National Bank of Ethiopia said all banks should be shut down. There's closure of entry or access into the Tigray, the northern region. There have been concerns that some of these actions might suffocate the civilians there with no access to basic needs and all that. Is there something the government is doing? And also there has been interest on the refugees that are being hosted in the region. Then secondly, there has been concern, and I'm sure you've seen it from the international community, that the current operation is staining the award, the Nobel Peace Prize that the Prime Minister got. What's the response to that? Thank you.
My name is Mohammed Ado. I'm from Al Jazeera English. Greetings to you, sir. Thank you. We just want to ask, we keep hearing of ringleaders. Could you specify for us who exactly are you holding responsible, and who are the people you're targeting and want to bring to before justice? Thank you.
Regarding questions, Groom mentioned about the concerns of humanitarian and impacts on the civilians, and also access to Tigray. It goes also with what Coletta just said. The first casualty with regards to access was access to information, and that was done by TPLF gang itself. When they were about besieging our commands there, the first thing they did was, because when our armies were noticed that the encirclement was very much conspicuous to miss, then they wanted to, they began calling stress call to the headquarters. And then before they explained what was going on, what they did was they cut off the tele infrastructure, and then also they cut off the electricity. So power went off, and then communication went off. So first casualty of access was access for information, and then that was done by TPLF leaders. The second was actually the road infrastructure, which is because of the safety issue, because they were also bringing, accumulating their forces in Raya, Alamata, and Afar borders. So their second thought, when they controlled the Mekelle front, and then also when they assumed they would also manage to control the one in Zalambasa and Dansha area, that was the second strong front that they wanted to push, was to move to the Raya area. So because of there, they put their forces, and then there would be a very much conflict-prone area. So there is no access by the road to go to Mekelle. So for lack of information that everybody has is also true for the government, because we cannot call and we cannot travel there. The only access we have is through our aircraft that bombarding jets, which are actually going and striking the areas whereby we have depots of fuel and depots of artillery because it has to be destroyed. Let's say would use it for malicious actions. So yes, there is less of information. Information that's coming out is very much scant, and then it's only what information that they are releasing from Mekelle that could be the only information that we have. But we don't think it would be long when we keep on pushing. I think they would open it for their own sake, because now what they are doing is they reconnected whenever they wish to send a news and message and letters and emails, and then they will cut it off when the other people would want to know what actually is going on there. So that's the problem that we are grappling with. Any window of dialogue? Yes, there will be window of dialogue. That's inevitable, but the question is when. When these objectives are met. Once we destroy these armaments, which are purportedly fall under these gangs, or which are suspected going to be, if they don't have now, unless we do something quick, then they might have a seizure of them, and then they can do something about it. So we have to destroy it. That's one thing. The other aspect is we still have personnel and some individuals in their custody. So we have to rest also those ones. We have to rescue our staffs and individuals. We cannot sit and discuss with an entity who subdued our armed forces, which have been helping their own parents. You may recall what they have been doing is they were collecting harvest. They were actually fighting locusts. They were actually building schools and health facilities, public amenities. They were actually feasting with their parents. They did not even anticipate this attack would come from their own colleagues and from their own friends, which have been there for 2 decades. Now, because of this very much unwarranted and unsuspected attack, there could be some individuals with them, so the government has to rescue. That's the first thing. The other one is the government has to bring those gangs to justice. And then it's easier to talk with middle echelon, lower echelon is okay. But there are few individuals. That goes with also what Mohammed asked. But the number could be 50, could be 100, could be 30. And then there were 2 of us, and then 2 adamant to call the shots, to train this special force, to give orders of the attacks, to go in the open, and then threat the federal government that they strike until Bishoftu and this. Of course, what we know was they had some missiles which could go to 300 kilometers. That means they could strike Bahar Dar, Amara region. They could also strike